All right. Before I invite any questions, there was one thing I forgot to uh, cover in the slides or the videos that I have posted. So let me talk about that before I do anything else. We have seen a few design patterns a couple of weeks ago. One was adapter, singleton, iterator, and mediator. But there is a fifth design pattern which I should have talked about when I posted the lecture videos and slides, but I don't have it there. So let me talk about that. So I'm going to use the whiteboard to explain that a little bit. It's a fairly simple pattern to understand, so there is nothing very difficult about it. This pattern is called facade. So it's a design pattern and it is called facade. What is its purpose? Well, we are talking about a system or part of a system, and it is made up of a number of different components. So inside this, we could have several components, and they all provide some useful functionality, and they communicate in various ways. So we have subsystems communicating, or these components communicating to each other. I'm drawing some arbitrary links here. So just like any object-oriented system, they communicate and they achieve certain functionality. And these subsystems or these components, so let me, these components here together provide some functionality, but individually also they provide some functionality. And there is a client here. So there's a client. And the client is interested in the functionality of the whole system. It is rarely interested in the individual functionalities. They are interested, the clients are usually interested in the whole functionality. An example that is provided in the literature is that of a compiler. For example, the Java compiler. In the Java compiler, we have, or in any compiler for that matter, if you have taken ICS 365, you probably know that there is a scanner, there is a parser, there is a intermediate code generator, there is a code optimizer, typically optimizer, and there is a code translator or machine code generator. And in some languages, there might even be something called a linker. But usually that is, that is also part of the language system when you purchase it. But these are definitely there in all compilers, although you don't have to have a code optimizer, but this is the typical organization. So a compiler contains a number of different components. So this could be your compiler, and this could be the scanner, this could be the parser, intermediate code generator, code optimizer, machine code generator, and so on. When you and I write programs. We are interested in compiling the programs. We are not too worried as to who does the scanning, who does the parsing, and who does code generation and all that. That is not in our minds at all as we use the Java compiler. All we want is to give our program to the Java compiler and then say, compile it. Although one could say maybe we want to expose the individual functionalities, but that is rarely done in a compiler. You don't usually get to just use the scanner. You usually compile your whole program. So what the facade does is it hides the individual components and it provides an interface to the client. So the client can access the functionality of the facade through well-defined interfaces. So for example, in a compiler, I suppose the only thing you do is say compile. That is the only thing we really care, right? So if you are the developer of a program, you would tell the compiler, compile this, and how it carries out the task through the individual components is not really your concern. Similarly here, the library class that we have in our design this week, that is a facade because it contains a number of components like a catalog, the member list class, member class, book, and so on. So there are a number of different classes and their corresponding objects that make up the functionality of the library system. And what we have is just a set of methods in the library class through which any client, in this case, the client is the user interface. The user interface can then simply invoke the library methods. So the library is the facade. It has a number of methods like add member or issue books or place, hold, etc. There are a number of methods that we developed for the library class. The user interface simply uses these methods to do different things. The individual components don't really know of a library. So the components don't know of the facade. But the facade knows about all the components that make up the system. Okay. Some students confuse the facade and the mediator. The purpose of the mediator is different. The purpose of the mediator is to reduce the communication complexity. Here, the purpose of the facade is to essentially provide a convenient interface for the client. In a mediator, the colleagues know about the mediator, whereas in the facade, the individual components are unaware of any such entity. So the facade is kind of an outer layer that works with all these individual components and then provide more functionality. So the purpose is not to ease any communication difficulties. The purpose is to provide useful functionality by combining the functionalities of the individual components. So it is not just communication that we worry about here. It is about using these individual components, how to sequence the method calls, for example, in the library system to various classes like members and books and all that. What should I call first? What should I call second? What should I call third, etc., so that I can return a book, for example. So the purpose is different. The way the facade works is very different from the way the mediator works. The mediator is simply a place for which it basically acts as a message routing system, whereas the facade is actually worried about providing application functionality. Okay, so I am supposing that all the groups would be implementing a facade for your group projects. That has been the typical approach used by all the groups for all the projects in the first project, I mean, always. Otherwise, those complicated functionalities will have to be provided by somebody else. And you don't want to probably split it up among many different groups. That is probably not going to be a good design. Okay, that is what I wanted to say about the facade design pattern. Okay. Otherwise, I hope all of you had a chance to go through the sequence diagrams and look at the class diagrams and see how the design all fits together. And I also hope you all had a chance to work on the group projects. Okay, now that's what I had to say about the facade design pattern. Now let me see if you have any questions. Anyone?
So I have a question.
Okay.
It's just because you mentioned this now. It seems like you're careful to say components versus a class. What would be the difference there? Why I say component versus a class?
Components are, I mean, I didn't really want to say a class because these could be just, you could think of these as objects, or you can think of these as each one of these could be thought of as maybe a collection of different classes working together. Okay. So I could have used the word classes without really changing anything. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, when you talk about an object-oriented system, it's a good question as to whether we should be talking about the classes or the objects, so how it functions. So it could have been, we could have simply said that all these objects work together, but then we don't really know how many objects. But then a component can be an object, an instance of a class. A component is never a class, but it has to be an object. So what I'm trying to say is, how do I describe the working of an an object-oriented system? Should I be talking about the classes, how they interact? Maybe that is one approach. Or you could be saying, okay, let me show you an instance of a system. I have 3 member objects, 5 book objects. Okay, I'm showing an example at that point, right? Whereas I could also explain the library system by showing, okay, look at this code here. The member class has all these methods. It has all these fields, and they invoke methods of the other classes. So at that point, I'm not really talking about an object. I'm talking about the classes. So
It makes sense.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was going to ask you more about an object, but I just wanted to see if there was really, you know what I mean, underlining, because it has to be some kind of a object existing in order to provide the functionality, right? The class
Mhm.
just is a class.
Yeah, yeah,
It makes sense, but I just
yeah,
wanted to know what's the
yeah,
clarification.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing is, if you think of a compiler, if you are thinking that there are just 5 components of the compiler: scanner, parser, intermediate code generator, code optimizer, machine code generator, perhaps the parser itself could be containing multiple objects made up, I mean, programmed through different classes, and they may be cooperating. So this itself may not be a, a what do you call, a single class or a single object. So from the facades viewpoint, there may be just one parser, so that the parser object may be thought of as the component, but inside that there could be little components, so that itself may be thought of as a facade. I mean, maybe that is an extreme view, but what I'm saying is that this single box that I have here may not be in itself a single object, or a, that when I say that component, it may be actually built up of a number of little things. And yeah, and there is this field called component technology. Actually, I'm digressing a little bit here. And there is something called Java Beans, using which you can create these components. I don't know, I don't think it has taken off that well, where the idea is that you can use those classes, you can use certain classes and use them like components that you find in electrical engineering, you know, like those IC chips or those kinds of things. I'm digressing really. So there, sometimes that word component is used for those kinds of things too. Yeah, but we are here saying that a component is a piece of software that provides some functionality. So functionality. So it could be the actual object, or it could be a collection of objects. Yeah, sorry if it
It's
is a
fine.
little
Thank you.
confusing
It
at this
makes
point.
sense.
Yeah, all you have to know is that there is some code that is, they're all cooperating with each other. And I mean, cooperating meaning they communicate to some extent, but it is a facade which is actually orchestrating the show, which is the case in the library class. Yeah. Anything else? That was a very good, very thoughtful question. Anything else? Okay. If you don't have any further questions, let me make the class exercise accessible to you. And one thing I wanted to say was, I mean, you know this, I want to talk to each group. And so I have to create the breakout rooms, and in such a way that the groups are in the group members are in the same breakout room. So that will take me a little bit of time, because I have to look at the membership and then I have to do everything manually. So things are not going to occur instantaneously. The second thing is, I think maybe I'll have to talk about 10 minutes or 15 minutes with each group. I don't know exactly. It depends on how things go. So I may have to interrupt your work. So otherwise, it won't be possible to finish everything on. I mean, if I wait for every group to finish before I start asking, I mean, before I discuss with the individual groups, it would take probably a long time, because it may be 8:30 before when I get started, you know. So I don't want to do that. Okay. Any other questions before we do the?
Uh, yes, when I took the quiz last night, it was put under the grade as class exercise 6 instead of.
Oh, okay. I will go ahead and my goodness, I will go ahead and thank you for pointing it out. It came as class exercise 6. Okay, let me jot it down here. So that was, yeah, there are so many components, and sometimes I I use the word component again, and I once in a while set the wrong entries in things. Okay, so this is class exercise for this week. This, right, okay. Class exercise week 7, grade item. Okay, I'll do that. I'll check it out. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Anything else? Thanks for pointing it out. Appreciate it.
Was there any reason there was only one attempt?
That was another mistake. Okay, I need to change the number of attempts. I need to set them properly. There was no reason. It was just, the thing is, normally when you create a quiz, it comes out, the default is 1. Sometimes I forget. Yeah, I will try not to make that mistake next time. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, thank you. Let me go ahead and stop recording, and then I will create the breakout rooms.